Tuesday, October 18th, 1977 was a beautiful warm day in Evansville, Indiana. Ray Ryan spent the early part of the day reading his morning paper, talking on the phone with an employee at his oil company office, and playing a game of backgammon with his wife, Helen. At 11 a.m., Ray got into the driver's seat of his new Lincoln Continental Mark V and drove the mile from his Lombard Avenue home to the Olympia Health Spa. After spending about 2 hours there, he got back into his Lincoln, turned the ignition, and suddenly an explosion ripped through the car. Pandemonium ensued. Cars in the parking lot were engulfed in flames. 20 windows were shattered in a nearby apartment complex, shrapnel fell from the sky, and the force of the blast cracked the health spa's outdoor swimming pool. Sam Gates, an ambulance driver who happened to be nearby, rushed to the scene. Along with another spa visitor, he pulled Ryan out of the burning car. Gates put his ear to Ryan's mouth to listen for breathing, but he only heard a death rattle. A man with a walkie-talkie approached Gates while he tried to move Ryan's body further away from the burning car. The man offered no help and vanished. Another member of the assembled crowd helped Gates. A priest who was also visiting the spa and had parked his car next to Ryan's offered a final blessing. What led to these earth-shattering events on an average day in Evansville, Indiana? Who was Ray Ryan, and why did he meet such a sudden and violent end? And most importantly, what does all this have to do with a diorama and a basement barroom and a historic house museum in Cedar Rapids, Iowa? Hi, my name is Jessica Peel Austin. I'm the Curator of Museum Collections at Brucemore, a National Trust for Historic Preservation site. If you enjoy hearing stories like these, subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss another video from us. And now, back to our story. Raymond John Ryan was born on January 9, 1904 to Daniel and Teresa Ryan in Watertown, Wisconsin. Ray was an imaginative child with a flair for theatrics and a strong desire to be liked. He showed early signs of having a photographic memory and natural mathematic abilities, and he picked up gambling early. Gambling was widespread in Watertown during the Prohibition era, and Ray's older brothers likely owned an illegal brewery where Ray began the pastime. A Watertown resident later recalled that gambling was just Ray's nature. He'd gamble on anything, including which bird would fly off of a tree branch first. Ray took a variety of odd jobs all across the Midwest and South in the mid-1920s through the mid-1930s. His penchant for gambling made the oil business appealing to him, but he didn't yet have the money to scrape together to buy oil leases. On October 26, 1929, Ray married his sweetheart, Helen Kelly, whom he had met while he was working in Milwaukee in 1925. The early years of their marriage were rocky as the couple and the country struggled through the Great Depression. Ray's gambling frequently interfered with his desire for success in the oil business. When he finally did buy a lease for some land in Centralia, Illinois, before he was able to drill, he needed to sell it to pay off a gambling debt. Ray was disappointed with himself as that field ultimately produced millions of dollars in oil. Ray eventually found success in Evansville, Indiana, where he arrived during an oil boom across Indiana and southern Illinois. His oil leases finally started to pay enough to keep him going in the business and to feed his high-stakes gambling. He formed his company, Ryan Oil Company, in 1940. By the late 1940s, he was a multimillionaire. Ray collected friends among the wealthy elite and in Hollywood as he traveled throughout the country gambling and finding investors for his oil leases. He also collected many enemies along the way. In his many years gambling and hustling, Ray had many inevitable connections with the mafia. The illegal gambling scene was largely controlled by the so-called Chicago outfit from the 1930s onward. Following the repeal of Prohibition, the mob moved into labor racketeering, illegal gambling, and loan sharking. It expanded into Milwaukee in the 1930s, where Ray probably had his first few encounters. It was likely that he borrowed money from them at times, and that his prowess led to the mob giving him money to gamble with for a share of the proceeds. The outfit also expanded to Hollywood in the 1940s and to Las Vegas in the 1950s. Likewise, Ray had also expanded his operations outside of Indiana. Wealthy vacationers started arriving in South Florida to spend their winters in the early 20th century. Illegal gambling followed closely behind, with all of its connections to the Chicago outfit. Notorious gangsters like Al Capone and Meyer Lansky took up winter residences in Miami. Drawn by the warm weather and good gambling, starting in the early 1940s, Ray and Helen began to spend their winters there as well. Staying first at the Rooney Plaza Hotel, the Ryans then purchased an interest in a new hotel that was being built in Bal Harbour, the Seaview Hotel, in 1948. In 1952, he and several other investors purchased the El Mirador Hotel in Palm Springs and began to renovate it to the tune of $2 million. He and Helen began to spend more of their winters there rather than in Florida. This West Coast location placed Ray in close proximity to the many mob contacts he had had since his earlier days in Milwaukee. Back in 1949, Ray had played a game of poker with legendary gambler Nick the Greek Dindalos at the Flamingo Casino in Las Vegas, where Ray bested him. Some sources claim that Nick lost perhaps as much as $300,000 in the course of the game, but Ray would contend that it could not have been more than $15,000. Roughly a year later, Nick came to believe that Ray had cheated him through an elaborate spying scheme. It's unclear whether the cheating ever occurred, but nevertheless, the story followed Ray for the rest of his life. This game ultimately was the first in a series of dominoes that fell and caused Ray's murder. Nick never forgave Ray for the loss, and toward the end of his life, when he was low on funds, Nick told his mob contacts that he wanted Ray dead. Nick had also sued Ray for cheating in an effort to recoup his losses years earlier. Marshall Caifano and Charles Delmonico, two known organized crime figures, began attempting to extort Ray in 1963 for protection. They also attempted to kidnap Ray, but he escaped. His own mob contacts warned him not to contact the authorities about the incident, but Ray believed that Caifano and Delmonico were acting on their own rather than on the behalf of the mob, so the risk of retaliation was minimal. He contacted the FBI, and Caifano and Delmonico were arrested and sentenced to prison. Caifano was released in 1972, serving 9 of the 10 years of his sentence. Caifano spent the next few years plotting and again attempting to extort Ray. The IRS had also since closed in on Ray, and he was unable to produce the $1 million that Caifano demanded. On October 17, 1977, Ray Ryan met his end. Though investigators never compiled enough evidence to officially arrest anyone for the murder, the evidence pointed to Caifano and the Chicago outfit. Margaret and Howard Hall had been vacationing in Florida since the late 1920s. The Halls, wealthy industrialists and philanthropists from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and the last residents of Brucemore, had started their annual pilgrimages to Florida when they purchased their very first yacht in 1928. Their first winters married were spent either sailing in the Gulf Coast or spending part of the winter at Tatum Surf Club. They too decided to purchase an interest in the Seaview and began to spend part of their winters there, alternating their time between the hotel and their own private island they built in Marathon, Florida. The Seaview had luxurious private cabanas overlooking the ocean and the hotel's pool. It was here that Howard and Margaret met Ray and Helen. The Halls owned cabana number 22. Many Miami Beach hotels were home to flourishing gambling businesses. Cabana 1 was home to a bookmaking operation run by a St. Louis bookie and a mob captain. Ray claimed that he was unaware that this existed when the $100,000 a day operation was raided in 1950. Howard and Margaret were not known to be anything more than occasional, casual gamblers. They made occasional trips to horse or dog races, but there's no evidence to suggest that they were involved in any gambling to the same degree as Ray. Nevertheless, the Ryans and the Halls became fast friends, spending time together, lounging in their cabanas, and enjoying each other's company. Ray was drawn to celebrity and enjoyed collecting a variety of friends and contacts. In 1940, he had become friends with an actor, William Holden, a friendship that would last the remainder of Ray's life. In Miami, he crossed paths with Dino Corsetti, a card dealer turned singer. Dino changed his name to Dean Martin, and Ray would spend thousands of dollars helping Dean advance his career. This love of celebrity was a trait that he shared with Howard Hall, who loved any chance to meet interesting celebrities. Margaret, too, got to meet many of Howard's interesting friends. In a 1949 letter to Margaret, Howard wrote, "Your letter came this morning telling of all the people you met with Ray Ryan. I am enclosing the membership card to the surf club, which you can hand to Ray Ryan, and I think they will make a good member." Ray loved to purchase unusual or extravagant gifts for his friends. Howard was on the receiving end of one such gift. Howard, like Ray, had a flair for the theatrical. In his own home, he had built 2 rooms in his basement, the Grizzly Bar and the Tahitian room for entertaining his friends and business guests. The Grizzly Bar, where we're filming this episode, is a Wild West themed room, complete with birch bark lined walls, a bar purchased from a defunct tavern, built-in dioramas, and of course, a roulette table and slot machines. Somehow, Ray had come across a miniature room. Designed by department store buyer and miniature room artist J.H. Hoffheimer, the mini tavern depicts an 1890s style bar room. Ray purchased the miniature room for Howard, who wrote to Margaret in 1950. I was very thrilled when you told me about Ray Ryan's buying the Duffy's Tavern for me. It really is one of the cleverest things I have ever seen, and would rather have it than a nice painting, which probably shows my lowbrow rating. Possibly some of my great-grandfathers were horse thieves or bartenders. Ray's wanderlust eventually led him on a trip to Kenya with his friend William Holden. While there, Ray fell in love with the country and sensed another business opportunity. He purchased a rundown hotel and transformed it, with the help of his business partners, into the Mount Kenya Safari Club, hoping to attract the rich and famous to the area in the same way he had with El Mirador and Palm Springs. It was another success for Ray, though it was ultimately exploitative of both the people and resources of Kenya. When the club opened in 1959, Ray wrote Howard on club stationery, which listed the names of other charter members, including Sir Winston Churchill, Clark Gable, Walt Disney, John Wayne, Lyndon Johnson, and others. Ray wrote to Howard, "For the man who has everything. I thought this would be a unique and enjoyable Christmas remembrance. I'm enclosing a complimentary membership in the Mount Kenya Safari Club." While Howard was not a globetrotter and preferred to keep his travels to the U.S., Howard and Ray appeared to have kept up correspondence into the 1960s, though it doesn't seem the two crossed paths again after Ray began to spend more time in Palm Springs. Mount Kenya remained Ray's most treasured place, and following his murder in 1977, Helen returned there to scatter his ashes. So why am I telling you all of this? Ray's life could be interpreted in many ways. It was a classic rags-to-riches American story. A man works his way up through hard work in his chosen industries and is able to live a life of fabulous wealth, just like the stories we frequently tell about the families who built Brucemore. But Ray's life is also a cautionary tale of great largesse and risk that ultimately cost him his life. Sadly, we don't know if Margaret Hall knew about Ray's death in 1977. Howard had passed away in 1971, and by 1977, Margaret was 84 years old and her health was beginning to decline. We do know that the news of his death didn't even make the papers in Cedar Rapids, so it's unclear if he would have been a prominent figure anywhere outside of his hometown of Evansville, Indiana. I'm Jessica. If you'd like to hear more stories about interesting people you may not have heard of, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be alerted. Thanks for watching.